I just want to insert my opinion for like 2 seconds on the Nolan Wells case because I just saw where Nancy Grace came out with the transcribed CTO call. And here's my thing. I'm from the South, so I feel like I can speak on this because I grew up around nothing but racist, okay? And so as someone with this skin, I feel like I could speak out on this. Here's my questions. Why? First of all, so many of y'all want to say that it wasn't murder. Like, so many of y'all were so quick to say it wasn't murder, that things happened. If that was the case, then why do none of the friends know what happened? Furthermore, Nancy Grace just released a CTO call. Anybody in their right mind, if you hear what was on that call in the background where they're asking, is someone dead? First things first, you're not going to call CTO. You're going to call 911, typically, if you're worried about someone. Secondly, why did you turn down Coast Guard when they asked if you needed the Coast Guard? If you are sinking, and if there is that shit going on in the background, like what they're asking about, is someone dead, you should say yes to any bit of help that you can get, right? I also think it's odd that all of them got rid of their social media. None of them have really had much of an explanation. They do what your typical white people do in those circumstances. Look at the Murdaugh case, and there was no one of color in that case. But because they were prominent Caucasians surrounding around that death of the girlfriend, they did everything they could to cover up and get him out of it. The same rules apply to this, and like in my head, the same rules apply to this. They were both situations were boating, and in those situations, someone unfortunately lost their life. But getting back to the Nolan case, hearing that voice, like hearing that recording of them asking for, or just asking if someone is dead in the background. How is it that you're clueless and you have no idea what could have happened to him? That call, like, there's a reason why Nancy Grace got her bob fixed to the heavens, honey. That thing wouldn't move in hurricane force winds. She knows something. Her gut tells her something, just like my gut has been telling me something has been going on with this case. It was too weird. It was too weird. And I got to be careful with how I say things, because y'all love to drag me through the mud anytime I talk out against Caucasians. So I'm trying to be careful how I word this. But before I get in the shower, I've had a long day at work. Before I get in the shower, I really wanted to put a little bit of 2 cents in your head with that, because I commented on Nancy Grace's video and already people have started coming for me. And all I did was comment, why did we call CTO and not 911? And several people commented and said, well, because there was no medical emergency. You fucking racist idiot. What do you mean there's no medical emergency? Open your fucking ears. And do you not hear them in the background asking if someone is dead? Are you that small-minded that you will forego any bit of the facts because you need your story to be the truth, where no one was murdered? If that was your youngin', if the roles were reversed, y'all, my God, as a white person, I could come out and say that. I know good and well if the roles were reversed, y'all would be dragging this through the mud. But because it was a group of Caucasians and it was an African-American person that passed away, all of you small-minded, closed, racist people, you immediately want to assume that he died of natural causes, or he caused his own death, or it wasn't a murder. I will always stand on the right side of history. I promise you. I don't care how many people cancel me, how many people come for me. My boys will know that their mother always stood on the right side of history. I have said that there was something fishy about this case from the moment it came out in the news. And as soon as I posted something about it, y'all came for me. And I'm just here to say that I stand with Nancy. There's a reason why Nancy is as into this as she was the Casey Anthony shit. Okay? She knows, because her spidey senses are tingling just like my spidey senses are tingling. If a youngin' ever went with me on a boat, it don't matter if they were black, white, brown, purple, green, blue, square, triangle, rectangle, obtuse, Capoose, Papatoose, you name it. That baby's coming home with me and my family. I don't care if anybody got in a fight or an altercation. If you go on the boat with me and my husband, I'm bringing you back. Scout's honor. Promise. Promise. There's something, you never leave anybody, anywhere, especially on water. Y'all can get the fuck out of here with your excuses. That's the thing about you racist people. Y'all will make an excuse out of anything to justify any type of actions. Every single time. There's always an excuse. Just as soon as something happens in the media when an African American or a brown skinned person is involved, you're quick to say, stupid is as stupid does, right? All those things. But you didn't say that about the young girl that died with the Murdochs on the boat. Everybody was boo-hooing tears about her dying. It was so tragic, right? But we don't have that same sympathy for this poor youngin' who had his whole life ahead of him. It doesn't matter what the familial situations were, because I saw that being thrown around. That doesn't matter. He went out with a group of friends. He should have came back with a group of friends, alive. And if he ever went missing, their first thing should have been, we need to find him. We need to know what's going on. How is it that we all of a sudden, everybody's got amnesia and nobody knows what happened to him and nobody can find him? Make that make sense. Those are the type of people that I don't want my children around. Y'all are so twisted. Y'all are so twisted. I cannot wait for the truth to come out about this poor baby. Just to prove to a lot of you small-minded, closed-minded, racist people, how many more people have to die for you to see that there is a common denominator here? There's a problem. I wouldn't let my own children who are Caucasian go on a boat with a group full of other Caucasian children. Let that sink in. We'll not allow it. The only time I'll allow it is if I'm there. That's it. I pray that some of y'all find a little bit of brains in between your ears. And I pray that some of y'all find a little bit of empathy too. Because all of you closed-minded, small-minded racists are also you claim to be Christians. Y'all are the most evil people I have ever seen in my entire life. Evil. Evil people. And that right there is why so many young people, and I don't even think I'm young, but I can include myself in this. There's a reason why me and my family don't go to church every Sunday, every Wednesday like I did when I grew up. Your body is your temple. Jesus is right here. Those of you that go to church on Sundays and Wednesdays, and the ones that post your Bible verses or, you know, live, laugh, love, eat, pray, love, whatever, on your walls, you're the same people. You're the same people. I'm disgusted with y'all. Like, to everyone with brown skin, please let me formally apologize, because I do not share the views and the thought patterns and anything to do with what the people that share my skin color have. But I apologize for these small-minded people, because as someone who was raised around nothing but small-minded racists, I grew a brain myself and decided what I wanted to pick as right and wrong. And I'm so sorry that not all of us feel this way, but I promise you I feel so passionately about this that I will do everything that I can in my power to never stop running my lips to help just shed light onto what y'all go through. I love you, but I had to do this. I gotta get in the shower. Bye.
Now, you saw Janetta Brantley. You've heard her. I have no reason to disbelieve anything she's saying.
So if I'm prosecuting this, I'm worried that I need a witness in 2026 to exclude the possibility that it's either AI generated or doctored, just like you suggested. And I think that she's very credible, but I think we need to go one step further. The other concern I have, Nancy, is if the independent autopsy is showing inconclusive death results, now I really want to see the other autopsy to see, is there trauma to the body? Is there something that happened? These are the concerns I would have as a prosecutor. But we've now opened the doors to these guys may in fact have committed obstruction of justice.
Hold on. You're putting the cart before the horse. Before we talk about obstructions such as allegedly lying or covering something up, you've already mentioned two distinct lines of inquiry. One is that the audio that Janetta Brantley enhanced innocently, I believe, had been already AI or doctored. Okay, let's follow that through to its logical conclusion. You just throw that out there like a stink bomb at the circle. You know what a circle meeting is, right? In the United Methodist Church, all the ladies have circle meetings. Okay. To suggest this was doctored before Janetta got it means it had to have been doctored or AI created by who? The Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. No, don't just go, that doesn't work in court, Burkhartz. You can't just throw, that's like the sod defense. Some other dude did it. What dude? What are you talking about? So you're saying AI doctored by who? If it's not Janetta, then who? She got it. The same sound that was released by the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. What? You think they doctored it?
There is nothing normal about this case. And if the
That's not what I asked you. I'm asking you to explain your premise, and you're not doing it.
I said if I were a prosecutor, I would want to be able to establish with expert testimony that what we are listening to is real. And I would want a witness, because I'm telling you, with this case, with as viral as it's been, I'm not disagreeing that it's real. I'm saying I would want to be able to bolster that very credible woman's testimony, and she is very credible. I have no doubt that what we're listening to and what she did is credible.
Before we get into any of it, we need 60 seconds from you. We've been watching our own numbers on this case closely, and they tell us something worth saying out loud. Far more of you are watching these updates than are actually subscribed, which means most people finding this video are finding it cold, watching once, and never seeing the next piece when it drops. If this case matters to you, join the community and hit subscribe right now. It costs nothing, and it's the only way you don't miss what comes next. Thank you. Let's get into it. Before we get into a video that has absolutely nothing to do with forensic evidence and everything to do with how divided this case has become online, we want to ground this the way we always do, with Nolan himself, because it's easy to lose him entirely in a story like the one we're about to walk through. Nolan Wells was 18 years old, a graduate of Ocean Springs High School, and by the summer of 2026, a football player at Southwest Mississippi Community College. The night before the 4th of July, rather than going out with friends the way most teenagers his age would, he stayed home and cooked salmon for his parents. His mother, Christine Wells Wansley, has returned to that detail more than almost any other in this entire case. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was exactly who he was. Friends describe him consistently, across dozens of separate, unconnected accounts, as energetic, big-hearted, and someone who made the people around him feel like they mattered. One friend has said simply that Nolan was like a brother to him. Nolan came from a genuine, long-running friend group on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Kids who had grown up around water, around boats, and around Horn Island specifically, a barrier island roughly 10 miles off the mainland, reachable only by private boat, with no buildings, no stores, and no lifeguards. Going out there for 4th of July had been a yearly tradition for this group for years. The kind of gathering where hundreds of boats and thousands of people converge along the same stretch of shoreline, and where it's common practice to ride out with one group and ride back with another. That single piece of context matters enormously to understanding everything that came after, because it's the explanation friends have consistently given for why Nolan wasn't with them when they finally left the island. On July 4th, Nolan traveled to Horn Island, a barrier island off the Mississippi Gulf Coast, with a long-running friend group that had made that same trip for years. Sometime that afternoon, his friends both developed serious mechanical trouble, took on water, and had to be towed back to the mainland, according to friends who were with him. Nolan chose to stay behind on the island with a young woman he'd met that day, planning to catch a ride back later with someone else, something they described as common practice at Horn Island given how many boats and people converged there for the holiday. He never returned. His body was recovered 2 days later, on July 6th, in the water near the island's northwestern tip. The search that followed, spanning 2 full days, involved the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, the United States Coast Guard, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the National Park Service, and eventually volunteer groups, including the United Cajun Navy. Working boats, drones, and shoreline patrols across miles of undeveloped coastline in summer heat. Nolan's identification, once he was found, was confirmed through dental records rather than a visual identification by a family member, a detail that on its own says something about the condition in which he was recovered. An independent autopsy, conducted separately from the state's official examination, has since concluded that both the cause and manner of Nolan's death are undetermined. Not drowning, not homicide, undetermined. In large part because the body arrived for that second exam without the lungs or the throat, 2 of the most important pieces of tissue a pathologist would need to confirm or rule out drowning with confidence. We've covered every piece of that timeline in exhaustive detail in our previous updates on this case, including 2 separate friends who have since spoken on the record, a viral video and a viral photo that were both directly disproven, and a forensic panel debate over what that undetermined finding actually means. If you're new to this case, we genuinely recommend going back and watching those first, because what we're about to cover today only makes sense once you understand how much of this case was already documented, sourced, and on the record before the video we're discussing today ever existed. Because today isn't about new forensic evidence. Today is about a reaction video that has, in its own way, become part of this case's story, whether it deserves to be or not.
Everyone in the background is saying, is he dead? Nolan, wake the up.
Claiming they're sinking and calling for help. And yet, in the background, are we really hearing all of this other activity?
Nobody has ever, none of the kids on this boat have ever admitted that anybody said that they thought Nolan was dead.
Detail assistance, Vicky speaking. How can I help you?
Hey, we're at the west tip of Horn, and our bilge pump stopped working. We're sinking. Can y'all please come? We have a membership.
All right, of course. How far is the water coming up, sir? Can you give me a description? Ankles?
What'd
Hello?
you say? Hey,
Yes. How far is the water coming up, sir?
it's coming up. We're just sinking. I don't know. Like we're going down now.
All right. Well, let's get you going. Membership number or phone number listed on the account, sir.
I don't know the phone number. It's either. I think it's. Try that.
All right.
I know we have a membership, like guaranteed. I don't
All
have the
right.
tag
Unless
on
you
here.
have a
It got ripped
membership
off.
number or anything, it's okay. I'll get you over to the captain. What's the best phone number to reach you at?
Reach me at.
You are hearing the audio distress call from the boat. That is the boat on which Nolan Wells went to Horn Island. Now, there have been a lot of different accounts about whether he was on the boat when he came back from Horn Island, when he was supposed to come back from Horn Island. He never came back from Horn Island. And you can clearly hear on that version, which we obtained from the Mississippi Department of Marine Research. They released it.
In the days after Nancy Grace aired the CETO distress call audio on her program, a woman recorded herself informally, described in her own video as speaking from her bathroom before a shower, posted a reaction that spread far beyond her usual audience. She introduced herself as someone raised in the American South, said she was speaking specifically as a white woman on this case, and used that framing to argue that the friend group around Nolan was almost certainly protecting someone, and that the broader pattern she was describing extended well beyond this one case to what she characterized as a pattern of white communities protecting their own. Her video was picked up and expanded on by at least one other channel, one that frames its coverage around faith and community accountability, using scripture as a framing device and treating her reaction as confirmation concerns that channel had already been raising. Between the two, this reaction has now reached an audience that, in raw numbers, may rival some of the official press conferences held in this case. It's worth understanding the shape of this specific piece of content, because the format itself matters to how it spread. This wasn't a polished investigative segment, a press conference, or even a structured commentary video with sources listed and claims organized. It was filmed informally, without a script, with the creator speaking directly into a phone camera in what she described as a personal, unfiltered moment before getting into the shower after a long day at work. That informality is part of why it resonated with so many people. It read as raw, unguarded, and sincere, the opposite of a rehearsed talking point. It also means the claims inside it were made quickly, in the heat of genuine emotion, without the kind of fact-checking or sourcing that a more deliberate piece of coverage would typically go through before publishing. Both of those things can be true at the same time. The emotion behind it can be completely genuine, and the specific factual claims inside it can still be wrong or unverified or already answered by reporting that existed before she ever pressed record. The second video, built directly on top of the first, took that same raw reaction and gave it a more structured frame, opening with a scriptural reference about young people and the company they keep, then walking through her comments point by point, treating each one as confirmation of a broader argument that Channel had already been making about how this case has been covered. That second video adds its own claims on top of hers, including the assertion about a grandfather's advanced knowledge that we'll address directly in a few minutes, and closes with an explicit call for viewers to weigh in with their own opinions on what she said. We want to be completely upfront about why we're covering this at all, instead of simply ignoring it the way we'd ignore most reaction content. It's because this video makes several specific, checkable factual claims about the case, presents them as self-evidently true, and has convinced a real number of people that those claims constitute new evidence. They don't. What they represent is an emotional, opinion-driven reaction to an already public piece of audio, mixed with claims that, when checked against everything actually documented in this case, either don't hold up or already have a documented, publicly available answer that this video simply doesn't mention. We're going to walk through her specific claims one at a time, fact-check each one against what we've already established in our reporting on this case, and then talk honestly about the much bigger question this video raises. A question this channel takes seriously, and has taken seriously since the very first update we published on Nolan Wells. Whether this case has been treated differently because of who was involved. Those are two separate conversations. One is about whether specific factual claims in a viral reaction video are true. The other is about whether race has shaped how this case has been investigated and covered. Blurring those two conversations together, treating a debunked or unverified claim as proof of a systemic pattern, or dismissing a legitimate question about systemic bias because one specific video got its facts wrong, will be a mistake in either direction. We're going to keep them separate, the same way we've kept every other category of claim in this case separate from the start. The central factual claim in this reaction is built around a single question. Why would anyone call a towing company instead of calling 911 if they genuinely believe someone might be in danger? Here's the problem with that question, and it's a problem of basic sequencing that this reaction video collapses into one moment when it was actually two separate events, hours apart, involving two separate concerns. The CTOW call was placed that afternoon, while the boat itself, the one Nolan's friends were using, was actively taking on water after its bilge pump failed. That call was about the boat. It was placed to a marine towing service specifically because the emergency in that moment was mechanical, a sinking vessel, not a missing person. Nobody was reported missing at that point in the day. According to Warren Hudson, one of the friends who gave a detailed, on-the-record account of that afternoon, the group didn't even believe anything was wrong with Nolan at that stage. They believed, based on conversations he'd had directly with them, that he intended to catch a ride back with someone else later. The call that actually corresponds to genuine concern for Nolan's safety happened later that night, and it wasn't placed to Cito. According to Warren's account, he personally called the United States Coast Guard around 11 p.m. once it became clear Nolan hadn't come home and couldn't be reached. That is a call that functions the way a 911 call would in this situation, a direct report of a missing person to the appropriate emergency authority, and it happened. It's documented. It kicked off a 2-day search involving the Coast Guard, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, and the National Park Service. To understand exactly why the Cito call happened at all, and why it wasn't, and never could have been, a call about Nolan's welfare, it helps to walk through what Warren has described happening on that boat in the hours leading up to it. According to his account, the boat his group was using had been anchored in the same crowded stretch of water since late morning, and the sheer volume of people climbing on and off it throughout the day, wading in from the water and back out again, gradually dragged more water into the hull than the boat's pump could keep up with. By the time anyone noticed a real problem, the boat had taken on roughly 6 inches of water near the transom. Warren has described popping open a hatch and finding the battery completely submerged, which meant the motor could no longer trim properly. The boat's owner jumped into the water to try to set a rear anchor. Someone else worked to clear the bilge pump. The device meant to pump excess water back out, only to discover it had failed entirely. That is the emergency the Cito call addressed. A boat with a dead battery, a failed pump, and rising water, needing to be towed to safety before it actually sank. According to Warren, a friend operating a separate boat on a nearby Titterline offered to tow them out and away from the crowded shoreline, and it was only once that tow was already underway that the call to Cito was placed, to formalize the assistance and confirm membership details. Nolan, at that point, was not aboard that boat at all. He was still on the island. Nobody involved in that call had any reason to be discussing Nolan's welfare, because as far as the group knew in that exact moment, he was fine on land, with a young woman he'd met that day, planning to catch a later ride. So the premise underlying this entire viral claim, that nobody called for real help when they should have, treats an afternoon call about a sinking boat and a nighttime call about a missing teenager as though they were the same decision made at the same moment. They weren't. One addressed a boat, the other addressed Nolan, and the one that addressed Nolan was, in fact, made to the correct emergency authority. The same night concern became serious enough to warrant it. The second major claim in this reaction video is that background voices on the Cito recording can be heard asking whether someone is dead, and that this proves a friend group already knew, in that moment, that something had happened to Nolan. We addressed the specific claim directly in our previous update on this case, and we want to walk through it again here, because it's being presented in this new reaction as though it's a fresh, damning discovery, when it's actually returned to a claim that had already been reviewed and disputed by multiple people who examined complete, unedited recording. The verified audio, obtained through a public records request from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources rather than any social media repost, contains a caller reporting a bilge pump failure and a boat taking on water, followed by a Cito dispatcher asking how far the water has risen and requesting a description of the vessel. That is the confirmed content of that call. Former police officer Brandon Tatum, who has interviewed multiple friends connected to this case directly, reviewed the full recording and argued that treating any ambiguous background phrase as a reference to Nolan being dead would require the people on that boat to already believe something had happened to him at a point in the day when, according to every witness who has spoken on record, nobody believed that yet. He also offered a specific, mundane alternative explanation that any phrase resembling a question about death could just as easily refer to equipment on the boat, given that the battery had already gone underwater and multiple systems were failing simultaneously in that exact moment. We want to be fair to both sides of the specific disagreement, because it isn't actually as simple as one person being obviously right. Trial attorney John Mobley, appearing on the same broadcast, made a genuinely reasonable point that a crowded scene doesn't guarantee clear witnesses, and that people often don't recognize the significance of what they're hearing or seeing until later. He described a case from his own career, a child thrown from an upper level of a crowded shopping mall, where despite a packed food court, almost nobody who was present could clearly describe what had happened, because nothing about the moment had registered as significant until afterward. That's a fair, general point about human perception under pressure. But it's a point about whether witnesses nearby might have missed something happening on other boats around them. It is not, on its own, evidence about what specific words were or weren't said on the specific recording. Multiple people, across multiple separate reviews of complete audio, have concluded the same thing, that nothing in the verified, unedited version of that call contains a clear, confirmed reference to Nolan being in danger or deceased at the time the call was placed. Forensic Professor Joseph Scott Morgan, in that same broadcast, was careful to note that questions about a mark discovered on the back of Nolan's head during the independent autopsy remained genuinely unresolved and worth pursuing, while also being explicit that decomposition prevented any firm conclusion from being reached about what caused it, and that the finding remains listed as pending further investigation rather than as confirmed evidence of anything specific. That distinction between a genuinely open forensic question and a confirmed piece of damning audio is exactly the distinction this reaction video collapses. If a caption version circulating online tells you the recording contains a clear reference to Nolan being dead, that caption reflects an interpretation, not a transcript, and it is not new information. It's the same disputed claim we already fact-checked in a previous update, being presented again in this new reaction as though it hadn't already been examined, and disputed by multiple people with direct access to complete, unedited audio. Type the word sequence in the comments below. That's the word for what this entire reaction video gets backwards, treating two separate calls, hours apart, addressing two completely different emergencies, as though they happen in the same breath. If you understand why that sequencing actually matters to evaluating this case fairly, drop sequence now, and let's keep going. There are two additional claims in this reaction and the accompanying commentary that we want to address honestly, because unlike the first two, we don't have a documented, sourced answer that clearly resolves them either way, and we think it's important to say that plainly rather than pretend otherwise. The first is a specific claim that the group turned down an offer of Coast Guard assistance during that afternoon call. As of this recording, we have not found that specific exchange documented anywhere in the verified, publicly released CETO recording or in any official reporting on this case. It is possible this refers to some other interaction we haven't seen documented. It is also possible this detail is simply inaccurate, perhaps confused with the general fact that the group was able to resolve the boat's mechanical issue with a private tow rather than requiring Coast Guard intervention that afternoon, which would be an entirely different and far less significant thing than actively refusing offered help. Until this specific claim is confirmed through an actual document, recording, or on-the-record witness statement, we're treating it as unverified. The second is a claim made in the accompanying commentary video that a grandfather connected to friend group already knew, in advance, that a tow wouldn't be needed. We have found no documentation supporting this claim either. It may be a garbled reference to something else entirely. As of this recording, we cannot confirm it, and we're not going to repeat it as though it's established fact simply because it appeared in a video that a lot of people have now watched. We want to be honest about why we're drawing this distinction so carefully. Unverified does not mean false. It means exactly what it says, that we do not currently have the sourcing needed to confirm it one way or the other. If either of these claims is ever backed up with an actual document, recording, or on-the-record statement, we will bring you that update directly. Until then, treating them as settled fact, the way both of these reaction videos do, is exactly the kind of shortcut this channel has refused to take at every other point in this case. And we're not going to make an exception here, just because the claim happens to align with a narrative that's currently trending. Before we get to the Murdaugh comparison, there's something worth pointing out about this reaction video and the follow-up commentary build on top of it. Neither one mentions two of the most significant, already public developments in this case, The two pieces of viral evidence that once seemed to support exactly the kind of cover-up theory being argued here, and that have both since been directly disproven. The first was a video that appeared to capture a heated argument on a boat near Horn Island, with a voice demanding a phone back in a tense, angry tone. Attorney Ben Crump referenced this video publicly, describing what his team initially understood the audio to contain. For a period of time, this clip was treated online as damning proof that Nolan had been in a physical altercation over his phone in his final hours. The young man whose voice is actually on that recording came forward publicly. His name is Trayston Shepard, a close friend of Nolan's who was also on Horn Island that day. Shepard told ABC News directly and unambiguously that the voice on the tape is his own, not Nolan's, explaining he'd been in a completely separate altercation with another individual near the boats. He has since given an official statement to the Jackson County Sheriff's Department confirming this on the record. Crump himself acknowledged the shift publicly at a press conference, saying his team will be more careful going forward to frame details explicitly as what a witness told them rather than presenting them as confirmed fact. The second was a photograph circulating online, allegedly showing Nolan at a pool party after the 4th of July, used by some accounts to claim he had actually survived Horn Island and died later under entirely different circumstances. Nolan's mother stated publicly she never spoke with or met the person behind the original post making that claim. Rolling Stone later obtained photo metadata from an independent source, confirming the image was actually taken on June 27th, more than a week before Nolan ever went to Horn Island. Trayston Shepard, the same friend who clarified the argument video, also confirmed the date and the people in that photo directly. We're bringing both of these back up specifically because a reaction video built around the idea that this friend group is obviously hiding something ought to at least engage with the two biggest pieces of evidence that once seemed to support that exact theory, and that turned out once actually checked against verifiable metadata and an on-record statement from the person whose own voice was in question, not a hold-up. Leaving that out doesn't make the cover-up theory more convincing. It just means the video is working with an incomplete picture of what's already been established. One comparison in this reaction video actually deserves to be taken seriously rather than dismissed, and we want to give it real, fair treatment because it's the strongest part of an otherwise shaky argument. The comparison is to the Murdaugh case, a case involving a prominent, connected white family in South Carolina, where a young woman died in a boating accident, and the family at the center of that case was later revealed to have engaged in an extensive pattern of deception, financial fraud, and ultimately murder, none of which was fully understood or believed by the public until years of dogged, disbelieving investigation eventually cracked it open. The reaction video's point, stripped of its more inflammatory framing, is this. Prominent families connected to boating tragedies have, in at least one very well-documented, very recent case, turned out to be actively covering up serious wrongdoing, and it took far longer than it should have for that to be taken seriously by investigators and the public. That is a fair point, and it's worth sitting with honestly rather than dismissing outright. It is entirely reasonable for people watching this case to think about the Murdaugh case and ask whether official skepticism toward wealthier or more socially connected families, historically, has sometimes been lower than it should be. That is a legitimate, evidence-based concern about how investigations can be shaped by social position, and it applies regardless of race. It's also worth remembering that in the Murdaugh case itself, the initial boating accident that started that entire unraveling involved a young woman's death that was, for a period, also treated with a level of institutional deference that a family with fewer connections likely would not have received. That parallel, a boating tragedy involving young people from a locally prominent or well-connected background, receiving an initial round of institutional deference before further scrutiny eventually followed, is a genuinely useful lens to hold up against this case, and it's one we've kept in mind throughout our own coverage. Where this comparison breaks down, though, is in treating that general pattern as though it's already been proven to apply specifically to Nolan's case. The Murdaugh case became what it became because investigators eventually found hard, physical, financial, and forensic evidence connecting a specific person to a specific set of crimes, phone records, insurance fraud documentation, and ultimately confession, not because commentators online decided a family seemed suspicious and left it there. It took years, multiple separate investigations, and an enormous volume of hard, documented evidence before that case moved from rumor to conviction. As of this recording, no equivalent evidence connecting any specific named individual in Nolan's case to a homicide has been publicly documented. An independent autopsy that reads undetermined is not the same thing as an independent autopsy that reads homicide, and treating those as interchangeable, simply because both cases involve water, wealth, and a group of young people with a story that doesn't fully add up, skips over the actual, painstaking work that turned Murdaugh from a rumor into a conviction. The lesson from that case isn't that every unresolved boating death involving a prominent or connected family must be a cover-up. It's that patience, documentation, and follow-through eventually surface a truth in that case. And that same patience is exactly what this case still needs, rather than a conclusion reached in a bathroom before a shower. Before we move into the harder part of this conversation, we need to check in with you. If a case this complicated, this emotionally loaded, and this actively contested online is exactly the kind of story you want covered carefully rather than reactively, this is the moment to subscribe. We publish updates the second something is verified, not the second something goes viral, and that only reaches you if you're actually part of this community. There's one more thread woven through this reaction, and the commentary built on top of it, that we need to address directly, because it involves a real, named private individual who has already been put through exactly this kind of unverified accusation once before in this case. Part of the broader suspicion fueling this reaction video rests on the fact that alcohol was reportedly present that day among a group of minors, with one young man old enough to legally purchase it. That detail has circulated before, including in an earlier broadcast where a commentator pointed directly at a photograph and asked, on air, whether that specific young man had bought alcohol for underage members of the group. We addressed this directly in a previous update, and we want to restate it clearly here, because this new reaction video revives the same underlying suspicion without adding anything new to it. That young man is Bart Edmiston Jr. is documented. Confirmed role in this entire case is that he was operating the boat that towed his friend's disabled, waterlogged vessel away from a crowded shoreline that afternoon, the same rescue we walked through in detail earlier in this update. He has not been publicly identified as a suspect in any capacity connected to Nolan's death. His father, Bart Edmiston Sr., along with attorney Russell Latino, has publicly addressed online accusations against his son, including through a reported cease and desist action aimed at people spreading unsupported claims. If toxicology results eventually confirm underage drinking occurred that day, that would be a serious, separate legal issue involving whoever was actually responsible for it, a question entirely distinct from what happened to Nolan, and one that deserves to be investigated through actual evidence, not accusatory questions shouted at a photograph on live television, and not vague suspicion recycled inside a bathroom reaction video weeks later. We're naming this again, plainly, because a young man whose actual documented role that day was helping save his friends from a sinking boat continues to have his name pulled back into increasingly unrelated content, each time with a little less context than the last. Now we need to talk about the part of this video that we think genuinely matters, separate from any of the specific factual claims we've already walked through, because dismissing it entirely would be its own kind of dishonesty. There's a real, ongoing, legitimate conversation happening around this case about whether it received the scrutiny it deserved from the outset, and whether that scrutiny would have looked different if the people involved had been from a different background. Attorney Ben Crump has made this point directly and repeatedly throughout this case, framing it not as an accusation against any single named investigator, but as context shaped by what is described as the lived experience of black families in the American South, where he says certain people are investigated differently depending on who they are. That is a serious, substantive position held by an attorney representing this specific family, and we've covered it as such in previous updates. It's a position grounded in a documented pattern that shows up across decades of American criminal justice history, and it deserves to be engaged with seriously rather than waved away simply because it's uncomfortable. What the reaction video we're discussing today does is something different from that, and the difference matters. Rather than raising a question about whether the specific investigation received adequate scrutiny, it makes a sweeping claim about an entire racial group, asserting that white communities as a whole reliably protect wrongdoing within their own ranks, going as far as to say she personally would not allow her own children on a boat with other white children unless she was present herself. A second video built on top of this one goes further still, framing the friend group's behavior as characteristic of an entire race rather than as a specific. Individual choice is a specific. Individual people who have not been charged with anything, and layering in scriptural framing to present that generalization as though it carries moral authority rather than personal opinion. That distinction between asking whether a specific investigation was thorough enough and asserting that an entire racial group is collectively guilty of covering up crimes is not a small one. The first is a legitimate question about institutions and patterns, the kind of question journalism exists to ask, and the kind of question that has historically been proven right far too often in American criminal justice to dismiss out of hand. The second is a generalization about people based on their race, applied in advance of any confirmed wrongdoing to specific named and unnamed teenagers who have not been charged with a crime. Applying a collective judgment to individuals purely because of shared racial identity is precisely the reasoning structure that has, historically, been used against black defendants and black communities for generations, treated as self-evidently fair, when the underlying logic of guilt by group is flipped in the other direction. We are not going to treat those two things as the same, and we are not going to platform the second one as though it constitutes insight into this case, because it doesn't. It's a claim about an entire demographic, applied to individuals based on nothing more than their race and their presence in a friend group, and that is precisely the kind of reasoning this channel has pushed back against every single time it has surfaced in true crime coverage, regardless of which direction it points. We want to be direct about one more thing here, because it matters to how seriously anyone should take a claim like this going forward. A general concern about differential treatment in the justice system gains credibility precisely because it's backed by documented statistics, historical case studies, and patterns confirmed across large data sets, not because any single commentator felt strongly enough to declare it true in a single video. When a claim about systemic bias is reduced to one person's gut feeling about one specific case, delivered with total certainty and dressed up as moral clarity, it actually risks undermining the broader, legitimate version of that argument by making it easier for skeptics to dismiss the entire conversation as emotional rather than evidentiary. That's a real cost, and it's one this specific video, however well-intentioned, has contributed to. We want to bring this back to something we've said in every previous update on this case, because it applies here more directly than almost anywhere else so far. Real people connected to this friend group, several of them still teenagers, have already faced documented death threats after coming forward publicly. Trayston Shepard, the friend who corrected the record on the viral argument video at real personal risk, has spoken openly about the threats he and others in his group received after doing exactly the thing people online kept demanding they do: speak up. Bart Edmiston Jr., whose documented, confirmed role in this entire case was helping tow a disabled, sinking boat to safety, had to have his family issue a formal cease and desist through an attorney after online accusations aimed at him spread far beyond what any actual evidence supported. That is the real, human cost of exactly this kind of content, reaction videos and follow-up commentary that treat unverified claims and sweeping generalizations as settled fact, then spread audiences large enough that a percentage of viewers, however small, decide to act on that anger. We are not saying the woman in this reaction video, or the channel that built on top of it, intended for anyone to be threatened. We are saying that intent doesn't determine outcome, and that a case which has already produced documented harassment of named minors and uncharged adults deserves coverage that accounts for that risk, not coverage that treats inflammatory, unverified claims as harmless entertainment, because they're framed as personal opinion rather than reporting. Consider the actual math of how content like this travels once it leaves the original creator's hands. A video filmed informally in a bathroom before a shower reaches an audience of a certain size on its own. Once a second, more structured channel picks it up, adds scripture, adds its own additional unverified claims about a grandfather's foreknowledge, and frames the whole thing as vindication of a broader theory that channel has already been pushing. The reach multiplies. By the time it's been clipped, reposted, and argued over across comment sections that have nothing to do with either original creator, the specific caveats, I think, the qualifiers that made this personal opinion rather than reporting in the first place, have almost always been stripped away entirely. What's left, by the time it reaches someone's feed 3 or 4 shares downstream, often reads a settled fact, delivered with total confidence, about specific named and unnamed teenagers who have never been charged with anything. This is also exactly why we've been so careful, across every update on this case, to separate what's confirmed from what's alleged, and to name specific claims as unverified the moment we can't back them up with a document, a recording, or an on-the-record statement. That standard doesn't change depending on who's making the claim or which direction the claim happens to point. Type the word careful in the comments below. Not because of the clever word, but because it's the actual standard we're asking you to hold every piece of content about this case to, including ours. If you made it this far and you understand exactly why that standard matters more here than in almost any other case we cover, drop careful now, and let's move into where the actual investigation currently stands. It's worth taking a moment to talk about the mechanics of how a piece of content like this travels, because understanding that mechanism is part of understanding why we're spending an entire update fact-checking a single, informally filmed reaction rather than simply letting it pass. Platforms tend to reward content that produces a strong emotional reaction faster and more reliably than they reward content that produces careful understanding. A confident, angry, personal declaration that a cover-up is obviously happening will, in the short term, almost always outperform a measured breakdown of what's actually documented versus what's still unverified. That isn't a flaw specific to this creator or this case. It's simply how engagement-driven distribution tend to work, and it means that the loudest, most certain take on an unresolved case will often reach more people faster than a version that says, "We don't know yet about several key details." That dynamic creates a specific kind of risk in a case like this one, where the actual documented facts are genuinely complicated, genuinely unresolved in places, and genuinely require patience to sit with. A viewer who watches a 5-minute, unscripted reaction video framed with total confidence walks away feeling like they understand this case completely. A viewer who watches an hour of careful, source reporting that says plainly, "Here's what's confirmed, here's what alleged, and here's what we simply don't know yet," walks away with more accurate, but far less emotionally satisfying picture. Both experiences are real. Only one of them actually reflects where this case currently stands. We're not asking you to stop watching reaction content, or to assume every commentator sharing an opinion on this case is acting in bad faith. Most of the people reacting to this case, across every channel we've seen cover it, appear to genuinely care about Nolan and genuinely want answers for his family. What we are asking is that you hold every single piece of content about this case, including ours, to the same standard. Does this claim have a source? Is this a documented fact, a witness account, or a personal interpretation? Has this specific claim already been checked against the complete evidence? Or is it being presented as new when it isn't? That standard is the entire difference between understanding this case and simply feeling something about it. While reaction videos have been arguing over a recording that's been public for weeks, the actual investigation has continued moving, and it's worth grounding everyone in exactly where things stand, separate from anything discussed online. The family met directly with Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath. Coming out of that meeting, Ben Crum confirmed the district attorney intends to turn this case over to a grand jury once the sheriff's office completes its investigation and all evidence has been collected. A grand jury referral, according to legal experts, is standard procedure in Jackson County for unnatural or otherwise suspicious deaths and does not by itself confirm criminal charges are coming. Both sides also agreed to a mutual, simultaneous inspection of Nolan's phone, meaning forensic experts working for family and forensic experts working with law enforcement examine the device's data at the same time, in the same room, An arrangement legal analysts have called highly unusual and a reflection of how much distrust has built up between the family and local law enforcement over the course of this case. Sheriff John Ledbetter has confirmed his department has been in contact with the FBI throughout the investigation, largely because Horn Island sits on federal land, with FBI involvement focused specifically on digital forensics, recovering deleted data, and cross-referencing witness statements against the actual digital timeline. As of this recording, roughly 60 witnesses have been interviewed, and the independent legal team working alongside the family, led by attorney Eric Hertz, has reported receiving between 50 and 100 calls a day from people who were either on Horn Island that day or who know someone who was. That volume of calls, months after this case first broke, tells you something important about where public attention actually is right now. It isn't fading. It's still active, still generating new tips, still pulling in people willing to talk, months after the initial search concluded. Under Mississippi law, a victim's family is entitled to an official incident report within 72 hours of a death, as of the family's meeting with the district attorney. Well past that window, they still had not received it, though it later came out that communications had been quietly reassigned to a victim advocate within the district attorney's office. A handoff never actually explained Christine and Elmore Wansley at the time. Grand jury proceedings in Mississippi are conducted privately. Defense attorneys aren't present. The family's own legal team will not be in that room. Only a prosecutor presenting evidence to the panel, and the panel itself deciding whether probable cause exists for an indictment. Legal experts have been careful to note that a grand jury outcome here would not necessarily mean homicide. It could just as easily involve a far narrower charge tied to evidence handling or false statements, separate entirely from the question of how Nolan actually died. None of that has anything to do with a bathroom reaction video or a follow-up commentary channel. It is the actual documented institutional process this case is currently moving through, slowly, privately, and largely outside the reach of anything trending online. That process doesn't move at the speed of a viral clip, and it was never going to. Investigations that actually hold up in court are built on subpoenaed records, forensic analysis, and sworn testimony, not on how quickly a video accumulates views over a holiday weekend. We want to restate the actual forensic status of this case clearly one more time, because it's the piece most likely to get lost underneath a viral reaction like the one we've spent this entire video fact-checking. An independent autopsy, led by Dr. Roger Mitchell, concluded that both the cause and manner of Nolan's death are undetermined, not drowning, not homicide. That finding was shaped significantly by the fact that Nolan's body arrived for that second examination without his lungs or his throat. Tissue pathologists would typically need to confirm or rule out drowning with real confidence. Forensic pathologist Dr. Judy Melinek has explained publicly that drowning is what's called a diagnosis of exclusion, meaning a pathologist first has to rule out every other possible cause of death before confidently listing drowning as the actual mechanism, and that identifying trauma or natural disease becomes significantly harder in a body that has already undergone meaningful decomposition, which describes Nolan's body by the time that second exam took place, for days after first. Dr. Mitchell's report also documented an area of discoloration on the back of Nolan's head, described with defined margins rather than a diffuse pattern, something forensic professor Joseph Scott Morgan has said genuinely raises questions worth pursuing further, while being equally clear that decomposition prevented Dr. Mitchell from reaching any firm conclusion about what caused it. That finding remains explicitly listed as pending further investigation. It's worth remembering, too, that retaining the organs of the neck, the structures a pathologist would examine specifically to check whether breathing itself had been compromised, is not, on its own, unusual or sinister practice. Medical examiners frequently retain that tissue so they can go back and examine it further or preserve it for any future proceeding. What it does mean practically is that the second independent examiner was working with meaningfully incomplete picture through no fault of anyone specifically trying to obstruct that exam, and that incompleteness is a large part why the final word landed on undetermined rather than a confident, one-word conclusion in either direction. None of that has changed because of a reaction video. It also hasn't been resolved by one. The complete state toxicology report still has not been publicly released. The explanation for why Nolan's lungs and throat weren't included with his body for the independent exam still hasn't been addressed on the record by Mississippi state authorities. And in our view, that remains one of the single most important unanswered questions in this entire case. More important, frankly, than anything discussed in the reaction video we spent this update fact-checking. And Katie McCormick, the last person confirmed to have spoken directly with Nolan before he disappeared, still has not given a direct, first-person, on-camera account of her own. We're deep into this update now, and we want to check in with you one more time. If you'd rather have a case like this one explained carefully, with every claim checked against what's actually documented, then have it explained by whoever posts the angriest reaction first, this is exactly the moment to subscribe. It's how you make sure the next verified update actually reaches you instead of getting buried under everything else competing for your attention. It's worth stepping back for a moment and asking why a case like this one keeps generating reaction videos that outpace the actual documented facts. Because it isn't unique to Nolan Wells, and understanding the pattern helps explain why we spent this entire update fact-checking a single bathroom video rather than ignoring it. An undetermined cause of death is, by its nature, an uncomfortable place for a case to sit publicly. It doesn't give anyone a clean resolution. It doesn't confirm the drowning theory the sheriff's office initially suggested, and it doesn't confirm a homicide either. Into that uncertainty, people bring their own frameworks, their own prior experiences, their own theories about how the world tends to work, and a genuinely undetermined case becomes a canvas onto which almost any narrative can be painted, because there isn't yet a hard, confirmed answer to push back against it. That's true whether the narrative being painted is a systemic critique about race and scrutiny, a family's search for accountability, or a stranger's confident declaration, filmed before her shower, that she already knows what happened. This pattern isn't unique to true crime either. Any story that combines genuine, documented uncertainty with high emotional stakes tends to attract confident, competing narratives long before the actual facts catch up, precisely because uncertainty is uncomfortable, and confident narratives, whatever their accuracy, offer relief from that discomfort. The specific shape those narratives take tends to reflect whatever framework the person consuming or producing them already brings to the table, prior experiences with institutions, prior beliefs about how the world works, prior grievances that feel validated by a new, unresolved case landing in front of them. None of that makes those narratives automatically wrong. It does mean they need to be checked against the actual record before being treated as settled, the same as any other claim. This is also exactly why the specific claims matter so much, even when they seem like small details buried inside a much larger, more emotional argument. A claim that background audio proves Nolan was already known to be dead is either true or it isn't, and it has already been checked by multiple people against a complete recording and found not to hold up. A claim that the group turned down Coast Guard assistance is either documented somewhere or it isn't, and as of this recording, it isn't. Those specific, checkable claims are the load-bearing structure underneath the larger argument being made in this reaction video. And when they don't hold up, the larger argument built on top of them doesn't automatically become true, just because it's delivered with real conviction or because it taps into a genuinely legitimate, larger concern about how differently certain cases get treated. A structure built on load-bearing claims that collapse under basic scrutiny doesn't get sturdier just because the person building it believes in it completely. Let's be as clear as possible about exactly where this case stands, stripped of everything trending online, one more time, because that clarity is the entire point of this update. Nolan Wells went to Horn Island with a long-running friend group on July 4th. His friends both developed serious, documented mechanical trouble that afternoon, confirmed by GPS data, and a real, verified distress call to a towing company. Nolan chose, according to multiple friends who have spoken on a record, to stay behind on the island with a young woman he'd met that day, intending to catch a later ride, something described as common practice at that specific location. He never returned. He was found 2 days later. An independent autopsy has returned a finding of undetermined, not because of any confirmed evidence of violence, but in significant part because two friends, in on-record interviews agree on a broad shape of what happened that afternoon, while a viral video and a viral photo that one seemed to suggest something more sinister have both been directly disproven through metadata and on-record correction from the actual people involved. A 30-minute gap in the boat's departure timeline remains, at least partially, explained by a detailed mechanical account from one of those friends, though that explanation has not yet been formally confirmed against dispatch and cell tower records by investigators themselves. And a grand jury process is now formally set in motion, with a mutual phone inspection agreed to by both sides, and roughly 60 witnesses interviewed so far. That is, what is actually known. Everything else, the background audio claims, the Coast Guard refusal claim, the grandfather's foreknowledge claim, the broad racial generalizations layered on top of all of it, either doesn't hold up against the documented record or simply hasn't been confirmed yet, one way or the other. We want to close this update the same way we've closed every other one on this case, by bringing it back to the people who actually have to live inside it, long after a reaction video stops trending. Christine and Elmore Wansley are still waiting for a complete state toxicology report. They're still waiting for an explanation of why their son's lungs and throat weren't available for the independent exam they paid for out of a desperate need to understand what happened to him. They're still waiting for a grand jury process that hasn't concluded. None of that waiting gets shorter because a video convinced a large audience it already knows the answer. If anything, a confident, viral, unverified conclusion can make the actual, careful work still ahead, the phone inspection, the toxicology report, the 60 witness interviews, harder for the public to stay patient for, because it feels like the case has already been solved by someone with a ring light and a bathroom mirror. Trayston Shepard, Warren Hudson, Javon Williams, and Katie McCormick, whether or not she ever chooses to speak publicly herself, are real young people whose lives have already been reshaped by this case, some of them facing threats for the simple act of telling investigators and reporters what they say they actually saw. Bart Edmiston Jr. is a real young person whose actual documented role that day was helping tow a sinking boat to safety, and who has already had to publicly and legally defend himself against an accusation with no supporting evidence behind it. None of them asked to become symbols in a much larger argument about race, institutions, and who gets believed in America. They were, by every account that's actually been verified, teenagers on a boat on a holiday, the same as thousands of other teenagers on that same stretch of water that same afternoon. We are not telling you the concerns raised about differential scrutiny, in this case, are wrong. Ben Crump has raised them directly, consistently, and specifically, and we've taken that seriously in every update we've published on this case. We are telling you that a specific, viral, factually shaky video making sweeping claims about an entire race of people is not the same thing as that legitimate concern, and treating the two as interchangeable does a disservice to the actual, serious question underneath all of it. It also, we'd argue, does a disservice to Nolan himself, whose story deserves to be resolved by evidence, testimony, and a careful legal process, not by whichever video happens to generate the most outrage in a given week. If this update gave you something the reaction videos didn't, a fact check instead of a feeling, subscribe to this channel right now. We are consistently reaching more viewers than we're keeping as subscribers, and the only way that changes is if people who actually want careful source coverage decide to stick around for it. Now, before you go, one last thing. Drop the word evidence in the comments below if you believe this case should be decided by what investigators can actually document and prove, not by whichever video goes viral first. We read every single comment, and we will be back with the next verified update the moment there is one.